D3 is a set of objects, functions, and other good stuff that comes in the form of a third-party JavaScript file written by Mike Bostock, which you can use just like any external JavaScript file in the script tag. And we've included it here. So what D3 does is it creates SVGs, similar to what we created in early units, plus a lot more, but it does it programmatically rather than in the form of markup. One of the things D3 relies on is attaching itself to some HTML element, such as a div, for example. We're going to create an SVG inside that div with the ID draw here. And that's what we're doing now. Also notice on line 20, we have a JavaScript array with 5 items. And we're going to use those as the data to be provided to our SVGs. Notice there on line 22, we're using the D3 object and a function on that object called select. So that attaches the select. Inside in the select, we attach ourselves to the draw here ID. Also notice that D3 allows you to chain functions together. You'll see that they're separated by a dot. It conveniently allows you to chain related functions together. So you can see on line 23, we are programmatically creating an SVG element. Then we're creating and assigning a width attribute and a height attribute to that SVG. And the width and the height values are declared on lines 18 and 19. Line 22 results in the creation of a variable or an object called SVG. We could name it whatever we chose to name it. We're going to call it SVG. We then use that object then to call a particular function called selectAll. And that selectAll will select all the circles, will select as many circles as that are generated as a result of binding to the data on line 20. We then use the array defined on line 20 and pass it as a variable into our data function. We then use the enter function, the D3 enter function, to bind the data to the circles that we're about to create. So then we create a circle. We're going to create a circle for each datum, which is each entry in the array. The X value for each one will be set programmatically. And we use an anonymous function here. And the anonymous function can take 1 or 2 variables or parameters. In our case, we're using 2 at the moment, D and I. D represents the individual datum, such as 40, 50, 10, and so on. And I is the index of that datum in the array. By the way, the naming D and I is just a convention. You could call them anything you want to, but convention dictates that we call them D and I. So that will give us our X coordinate for each datum, for each circle. Now what we want to do is, on line 32, we construct it so that each entry, the X value of each entry, is 150 units to the right of its predecessor. The Y coordinate splits the height of the viewport in 2. And you can see them here. So these elements combine to be 500 pixels apart. And the radius then for each one of these has been defined in the array. So let's try a little experiment. Let's add an extra element to our data. We do refresh, we can't see it. Why not? It's because that last element is displayed, but it's outside the maximum width of our viewport. So keep an eye on that. It catches people out in the beginning when they're learning D3 initially. So we increase the width, and there we can see it. So that's a nice introduction to D3.